Okay, let us all go back to the 20th of April, Saturday, in Cumbria, Portugal. When the staff of the Natural History Museum were arriving in the morning, they realized there had been a theft overnight. They immediately started searching the museum. The cash was still there, the computers were still there. So they tested the whole collection, and they found that there were two pieces missing. These were 19th century rhino heads, two of which had disappeared with the thieves overnight. Now, it was difficult to understand what is behind this theft, but this is not an isolated case. There have been at least 18 similar robberies recorded by Europol during the course of this year alone, in antique shops, at auction houses, in castles, and in various museums. Let us park this burglary for a moment. Now, I have had the privilege of studying the lives of animals for the last 30 years or so, and came to be convinced that the animals that are on the top of our minds, be it the tiger, the rhino, the elephants, marine turtles, or perhaps polar bears, chimp or a gorilla, are really the faces of conservation. We relate to the environmental movement by looking at the eyes of these animals, in the way that, for example, with only 3,200 tigers left on the planet, the environmental movement is put to the test. If tigers were to go extinct, how can the world have faith in that we can actually make a difference to preserve a living planet? Now, there are two cases that I would like to share with you today and try to convince you that we must become global conservationists if we want to make a difference for the species that we care about, because in a globalized world, the purchases that some of us do in the consumer countries, call it food or wood items or perhaps the clothing, will affect what happens in the producer countries with the habitats of these species. Two cases then that will illustrate what motivates me to work in animal conservation. And this comes from 1991, some work that I did on the social behavior of primates in Tanzania. And I was following one day the troop of baboons as they approached an area of shrubs. Now, the dish of the day is Longhorn beetles. And the baboons are moving to the shrubs looking for these beetles. The male that I was following in particular immediately spotted one beetle up on a shrub. And that moment I realized that there was a female coming from behind. The females are only half the size of these massive baboon males, and spotted the same beetle but was going to lose it inevitably to the male. So what she did was immediately the following. Woohoo! And that is the alarm call of baboons, basically saying, help! This male is attacking me, help! And then all the relatives of this female started coming down from the trees, approaching the male that was startled, basically not understanding, well, this wasn't me really, but having to run for his life with 35 fierce baboons after him in a cloud of dust. Except for one baboon that stayed behind, this female that then snatched the beetle and started munching of it as she saw the other baboons disappear into the horizon. Now, of course, for me, she had deliberately lied to obtain the beetle. And it was only a year later, when I was writing up the research, that I realized that a study group in St. Andrews had already compiled 75 similar anecdotes of baboons lying, and really making the point that these animals have amazing cognitive abilities, very much close to our own cognitive abilities. That increased my admiration for these animals tremendously. And there's a second story in the shore of Lake Tanganyika, Gombe National Park. I was following some chimpanzees there when all of a sudden I saw a male chimpanzee start staring at me. I looked away, as you have to do with animals in order not to threaten them, and started erecting his hair and started approaching me slowly and coming towards me, as I realized this guy must be Frodo. Frodo was a male chimpanzee well known for beating up tourists and beating up newcomer researchers like myself. So I saw him coming and I understood this is it. I will be beaten up by Frodo. I tried to move back. Frodo started running towards me, and then lifted his legs and jumped on my chest, put me down on the ground, was jumping on my ribs. I managed to roll a few meters away from Frodo, hiding my face and lying still on the ground as I saw these black feet approaching and the breathing of Frodo next to my ear. I really saw again the images of my reading the books from various researchers about chimp warfare, and that occasionally a chimp will kill another chimp by a targeted bite into the skull. But Frodo did not do that. Frodo started knocking on my head like this. I counted 14 times, and then Frodo stopped. And then what he did next was to start grooming me, looking for parasites or ticks, but not really. What Frodo was saying is, okay, enough. I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to scare you like this. It's okay now. You can stand up. It's fine now. And then Frodo walked away. He had really shown to me remorse, a sense of perhaps even compassion. And that influenced my journey in conservation profoundly, because understanding that human beings, a lawyer, an engineer, the manager of a business that has international scope, politicians, have in their hands and in their decisions the future of many of the species that we care for, because development and conservation do not always go along in the best ways. So when Frodo had me in his hands for a decision to make what to do with me, he showed compassion. And I would like to reciprocate this compassion to the animals that I have so much admiration for. Now, I am not alone here. There is a group of people, including you and many thousands others, probably hundreds of millions meanwhile, that care. And the reasons for caring for the animals that I just mentioned are quite diverse. Most of these reasons are selfish in nature. Now, there is nothing wrong with selfish motivation. Some people may relate to jaguars, to parrots, or to monkeys of the Amazon basin because the rainforest, which is their home, provides us with medicine. At least 3,000 plants have curative properties against cancer, and 70% of those come from the rainforest. So we may care to preserve the rainforest. The rainforest is also key in stabilizing the Earth's atmosphere, and that may be your reason to care. But the parrots and monkeys in particular are also a source of food for indigenous communities in the Amazon, and they care to maintain these species and to see that these species continue to be a source of protein. Now, the reason to care can be as simple as you have watched an exciting television documentary, immediately said, wow. It was this admiration when all of a sudden the cheetah tries to get at the gazelle and the gazelle finally manages to escape through amazing photography that gets us this feeling of awe. And you may want this feeling of awe to be experienced by their children and grandchildren, and that's why you care. But many of the people in this community of concerned will simply say, well, I care because it is just the right thing to do. And it can be as simple. What brings together everybody in this community of carers is the fact that extinction is not something good. Extinction caused by us human beings today is not desired by any of the user groups of natural resources and animals, whether they use them as tourist attractions, whether they use them for food, or whether they are a source of leisure for you, entertainment, and you would like to see them preserved forever and generations to come. And extinction is happening. 41% of all the frogs and salamanders of the world are threatened with extinction today. 1 in every 5 mammals is threatened with extinction today. At least 896 species have been recorded as having disappeared over the last century or so due to our human activities. And one of them that is very close to my heart is the Costa Rican golden toad. It was last seen in 1989 and registered as the first official victim of climate change in the cloud forests of the mountains of Costa Rica. Now, when I arrived to live in Costa Rica for 15 years in 1995, the frog had already gone. I was unable to go to the cloud forest and take a photograph of this fantastic animal. The only thing that we're left with is the postcard. This is the postcard of the golden toad. The golden toad has been reduced essentially to a postcard. Extinction is irreversible. And it was a very powerful feeling to experience that. Now, conservation 100 years ago, 150 years ago, was a relatively simple business. You have a local challenge, an animal is being taken in numbers that are not sustainable, then you implement hunting quotas, you enforce them, and that animal can continue to be there, perhaps the population is even increasing. Or you set aside habitats as national parks, and that is your solution for a local issue. In this globalized world, however, the rules of the game have changed dramatically. For example, we have at least 3 oil exploration and exploitation companies putting under tremendous pressure the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to allow them to start drilling for oil in the Virungas National Park. And the Virungas National Park is the first national park of Africa. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's one of the last refuges of gorillas, of elephants, and of the most amazing okapi. Now, I will go back to okapi in a few minutes. But let me just illustrate with other examples the nature of the linkages in this globalized world. I wonder when was the last time that you had an Italian meal and you had pesto. Well, you should know pesto puts you immediately in touch with tiger conservation, because pesto is prepared with the pine nuts that come from the Russian Far East. These are the best quality pine nuts for pesto in the world. And if it was not because of the Russian government that decided to put a moratorium on the logging of the pine trees in that tiger habitat, and to have in place strict controls for the harvesting of pesto, we would not be able to enjoy pesto with the tranquility that we do today, in the sense that we are not compromising tiger conservation. Another example, you are preparing yourselves to go to the opera in Geneva, or in Tokyo, in Sydney, or in New York. Now you take out this lipstick and immediately you are engaged with orangutan conservation in Sumatra, because one of the key components of lipstick is palm oil. And palm oil comes from oil palms that have been grown over the last decade and a half or so, mainly in Southeast Asia, in vast numbers and over vast regions, compromising the very habitats that we care for, such as the last remaining forest of Sumatra. Now, the good news is that some of the most responsible palm oil producers are sitting around the table to discuss with governments and the conservation community which are the best practices, the best ways to make sure that palm oil production does not compromise the survival of these habitats that we all care for. Would you have thought that a wedding in Hong Kong has to do with shark and the oceans? Well, these weddings are known for being a gastronomic extravaganza. And one of the dishes that are proudly served at these weddings is shark fin soup. Now, hundreds of thousands of sharks are being fished unsustainably and in an unregulated way to satisfy the market of fins in Asia. Luckily, in Hong Kong, there is a movement just starting now of green weddings, where the groom, by solid information, will be able to test the menu against whether there are sustainably sourced items in there, and every other aspect of the planning of the wedding, so that the environment is absolutely minimized. We would like to see, of course, green weddings mushrooming and spreading across Asian society, and therefore reduce the demand for shark fins worldwide. But let's go back then to our burglary in Cambodia. This is not an isolated case in Europe. We have seen since 2008 a surge in rhino poaching. And this surge, last year, 333 rhinos were killed illegally. This year, the number is already, as from yesterday, at 324. And maybe by the time I finish this talk, 2 more rhinos will have been killed in South Africa, to satisfy an emerging market for rhino horn in Vietnam, after an official from the government said publicly that rhino horn may cure cancer. And that was in 2007. And the thefts of rhino horn in Europe are most likely generated to satisfy the market in Vietnam as a very lucrative business. Now, 2 weeks ago, an Australian and his son were apprehended in Lisboa airport and with 6 rhino horns in the luggage, heading towards Ireland, where Europol had already identified a gang that has been masterminding the robberies of rhino horn across Europe. So the fate of rhinos in South Africa is determined in Vietnam at the moment. And it is this basic message that in a globalized world, your choices and everybody's choices in terms of consumption patterns do have an influence on the species that we care for. There are good results in conservation. Mountain gorillas have been going up in the populations of Rwanda despite tremendous social strife. The right whales in Southern Africa are increasing in numbers and now can be reliably seen from the shoreline as a result of a global moratorium on whaling that was passed 25 years ago. We are seeing these results. Let me now reach 2 conclusions from the story that I have shared with you today. One is that the species, when they are endangered, they are conservation dependent, and even if we see their numbers increasing, we cannot let go because there will be new threats that you cannot always anticipate. The second message is the scale of the problem and the scale of the connectivity between consumption patterns and habitat destruction is such that we really need to appeal to the global citizens in consumer countries to become species conservationists. And I really would like to invite you to, perhaps when you go home, do a Google search, for example, for Okapi, O-K-A-P-I, and perhaps trigger yet again this wow effect. As you find out what this marvelous creature is about. And now that you're sitting in front of your computer, you might as well Google Sustainable Seafood Guide and become a marine conservationist that preserves the world oceans by purchasing in a very selective way your fish when you go next time to the supermarket in an environmentally friendly way. So this is really the start of your journey to save your wow. And to save my wow too. And I think it is really the journey that we collectively are embarking on for a living planet. Thank you.